It's usually the 0 to 1 that is the difficult point in terms of getting that first client or getting that first meeting. How did you overcome that hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about the course, and one of the reasons I decided to take the course was that, you very clearly said, hey, like you're going to be building agents. And I realized, from all the articles you're seeing online on LinkedIn today, we're the people who were building. They were building, things were failing, they were figuring it out.
What kind of people should take this Agentic AI course and what kind of people shouldn't?
My name is Mark Shea, and I went from reading about AI agents to shipping them for clients in about 5 weeks. I stopped applying for jobs. Now the interviews come to me. The fastest way to get recruited in AI right now isn't applying, it's
Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show to talk to me about your journey. In 2 minutes, do you want to give me like what you're doing now and what your journey has been? Maybe just a short one.
Yeah, no, of course. So very recently, I run Devonish Agentic Labs, and the simplest way I could describe what I do is I help operations-heavy small businesses stop growing by just hiring people and start growing by building systems. The niche I've landed in is cross-border logistics, firms moving freight between Mexico, the US, and Canada. These companies have a specific problem I've coined called the unstructured middle, the chaotic gap between their external data, so carrier portals, GPS systems, invoices, and their internal platforms. That gap gets filled by humans doing repetitive and sometimes error-prone work, and the agents I build close it. What I've learned, right now I have two signed clients. One is in the logistics space and one is in the not-for-profit space. In the logistics space, we've built a shift synchronizer and automated their bill of lading. And then in the not-for-profit space, we built a RAG pipeline that helps to convert some of their program documents. And then, what I would close by saying is what I've learned building at this scale is that the architectural decisions, so security, auditability, human checkpoints, don't actually change whether it's at this level or if you go enterprise. I think you just have more stakeholders watching them. So one of those decisions I make consistently is that every build has been running on client-owned infrastructure. And I've realized that it's actually not really an ethical choice, it's a deployment decision. So for a logistics firm, for example, handling sensitive freight data, it's often the sentence that I would say moves the conversation forward. So that's what I'm doing these days.
Very interesting. Were you always building agents?
No, actually, I think previous to taking your course, I was actually a product manager, specifically working in platform and doing a bit of AI work, but not specifically building agents. This is a new pivot. It's been the year of the pivot, so it's been a new pivot for me after taking the course, getting into the builder seat, not just the defining requirements and traditional product management or even AI product management. So that's been really exciting.
Not every student takes their class projects and makes it into products, and you have taken it into products, and now you have clients and you have your own agency, which is remarkable. Very few of them do it. So I wonder, like, how did you even go from the course that we had for 5 weeks on agentic AI, where you learn to build agents? How did you walk me through the journey?
So like how it went from sort of these projects to, building
Products.
product. Yeah. Um, well, it's interesting. The productization started with a naming decision, not necessarily the agency name, but the deliverable name. So when I started, working with clients and figuring out how do I even for the project, what is the process that I go through? And when I started calling it the Devonish agentic process instead of my Nathan workflow, I really had to define what is this? What it actually was. And that forced me to document a repeatable four-phase life cycle. So discovery, architecture, build, shadow mode, UAT. Um, the mind framework that we learned in the course became the core of what makes each build repeatable. So before I open any tooling, I define the mission, what the agent is supposed to accomplish, the intelligence, the rules that govern how it reasons, the navigation logic that controls how it sequences actions, and then of course the data contract that specifies exactly what data it's allowed to touch and what isn't. So I think that this structure it's what separates a system from a one-off build. Once it was a process, I could then scope it, and then once I could scope it, I could price it, and then once I could price it, I could pitch it. So I started pitching it. The other thing that made it a product or allowed it to become a product was moving into the real world, I realized something that a lot of people were worried about was trust. So, uh, there was a deliberate sort of security architecture decision that I made. Every build, I touched on this before, really runs on client-owned infrastructure. Nothing really touches my servers. And I realized that that helped move a lot of conversations forward, and it became a bit of a product differentiator. So the class really gave me the building blocks. Productization was figuring out which blocks belong in every build, regardless of the different types of clients I was speaking about. And the glass box logging, so the human in the loop checkpoints, the shadow mode period, these are a bit more custom. I think the line between repeatable and bespoke is essentially, I would say, your product definition.
Yeah, no, that's very true, and that's also the reason why product managers can move from one company to the other company, even if it's a different industry, because it's the business logic that changes, but not the repeatable patterns that you learn about. Um,
Mhm.
so, curious question is, it's usually the 0 to 1 that is the difficult point in terms of getting that first client or getting that first meeting. How did you overcome that hurdle? What made you go and take something that you learn in the class to go make it into a product?
Yeah. I mean, the good thing about the course, and it was one of the reasons I decided to take the course, was that, you very clearly said, hey, like you're going to be building agents. And I realized, from all the articles you're seeing online on LinkedIn today, you see a lot of people theorizing about agentic AI, but I'm realizing that the people who have the most value to offer, at least to somebody who at that point in time wasn't as involved in the industry as I am now, were the people who were building. They were building, things were failing, they were figuring it out, they were troubleshooting, things were in production, and they were like, wow, I thought it was going to be this, but now that it's in production, it's this. And, that push, the way the course is designed and that to push you to not think just about projects, but products even within the course, I think really gives you a lot of confidence by the time that you're done the course to then say, wow, what's the difference between me reaching out and, working for clients? So, that's sort of like the background, but then I would say warm network first, full stop. My first client in Nari came through a direct relationship. Opening ground came through someone who knew me and heard what I was doing. And I think there's no shortcut to that early traction. It comes from people who've seen you work and are willing to vouch for you. What I learned in the early stages, the conversation has to happen before the pitch. And that's kind of part of my discovery process. I'm not selling agents. I'm diagnosing a problem. So I developed a bit of a discovery framework that I call the unstructured middle diagnostic. It's, specific questions designed to surface the real friction point before I've proposed anything. So things like, what task interrupts your deep work more than 3 times a day? What are you manually processing on Sunday nights? Those questions do two things simultaneously. They build trust because the founders feel heard. And then they give me an anchor for a scoped, specific proposal rather than some sort of generic capabilities deck. It's a product thinking move, of course. Diagnose the problem before designing the solution, so you're not selling a capability demo when the client actually needs a workflow fixed. So the shift that's happening now is that the case studies are starting to do some of the work for me. An 8 hour to 15-minute result at, one of my clients is something that I can put in front of a prospect, and now it speaks for itself.
I love that, starting with a user problem before going with here is this tool or here's an agent. And I think that's a lot of the thing where folks go wrong is they start with the agent. They start with what should I build, what
Okay.
can I build, versus starting with the user first. Even in this age of agentic AI, we are still humans and we have problems, and we are
Yeah.
looking for tools and solutions to go solve those problems.
Absolutely. I think and this is something, even when I'm interviewing now, something that, I'm very clear with everyone. And I always ask this question too. I'm like, and I try to figure it out either before or during the interview, is this an AI native company or are they building AI features? And then also be really clear with them around just because I can build agents and I'm working in the agentic space, I think it's still really important and we should be following this process of, do we need an agent to do this work? Is the agent still the best solution for the work? And I think sometimes people are taken aback because they think you just want to build agents, but sometimes you just need maybe traditional AI ML, or maybe it's just like a workflow. And I think like if that solves the user pain point in a cost-effective way, like that should probably be, you should at least evaluate that solution before you move into agentic? So yeah.
And how are your interviewers reacting to that mind frame?
I think they're a little bit surprised. I think that what's happening right now is, we talked a little about this in our meet and greet. I think I'm actually a bit surprised at how much people are now reaching out to me. Like I had recruiters reaching out to me, after last year, I was impacted by a layoff and, figuring out what my next steps were and, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay in the same space? Am I going to pivot? I'm going to upskill. Love going to school, so I chose upskilling. And I think what's new that I was not doing before that you actually pushed us to do was to share our work on LinkedIn more and to share the process, not just the finished product, but what was it like building it and what surprised you, what actually didn't work, and how did you troubleshoot it? And I think that visibility into your process and the ways in which you think is something that you can't pretend, you can't make up in an interview, and you can't make up in general. So I think that sort of vulnerability, which is very new for me and from a career perspective, I think outside of tech, I work in the arts, and I think vulnerability is so, I would say it's one of the most important skills. And I'm realizing that even in my career now, it's just as important to be vulnerable about what you know and what you don't know, what you're learning. And it's also a very new technology in a productized way. And I think sometimes it feels like everybody's already 10 steps ahead. And I'm realizing that just talking about your process and what you're learning could be, it gets people interested. And it maybe, I think it also humanizes some of the folks, humanizes us to say, oh, like this person doesn't know everything. It's clear what they do know. Let's bring them in for a conversation. So that's new for me. I love all the folks who have reached out either for conversations, job opportunities, just based on what I've been posting and sharing. I didn't expect that, actually.
No, that's great to hear because I think that's one of the key differences between those who are able to transition is those are the folks who have actually taken the step, have not just like shared a link and said, here is my project, take a look, but more around the sharing, the thinking, the learning, the challenges that came along with it. And I'm seeing that as the value add, and I'm so glad to see that that's working for you as well.
Hmm. No, definitely. I was thinking about, like what changed? Like what did I do differently? And, even with posting, I can think about like through, I was thinking about, what changed? And, the first thing that came to mind was I stopped describing what I know and I started showing what I shipped. There's a version of my profile that said experienced in AI product management, you know? Versus the current version says build a RAG pipeline with 634 chunks across 20 documents. And, one of those can feel like a claim, and then the other one is evidence. So that's something that I realized really stuck with people. The second thing is I got very specific about the problem that I was trying to solve rather than the tools I was using. Because there's so many tools now, there's so many different ways to approach it. And I used to say, I build AI agents, and now I say, I help operations heavy logistics firms close the gap, or, I'm helping this not-for-profit client with education and knowledge management system. And I think that specificity signals systems thinking. And I didn't realize that going, now that I'm looking back. And of course, any PM can say they work with AI, but I'm realizing now I'm able to name the like exact bottleneck, the architectural pattern that, I'm choosing to solve, and why I made certain trade-offs. And then the last thing is, this program, without tooting your horn more, but it's true. Like, I credit is speaking fluently about the failure modes of AI systems. I think in interviews that really perks hiring managers' ears. I think many people can pitch the upside of an agent, but being able to say, this is where this system might break or breaks. Here's how I've designed around that. Here's the eval protocol and what it still doesn't cover, and being honest about we're actually still not looking, we don't have something to catch these potential errors. I think that conversation gets callbacks because it signals that you're building things in production, you've actually been in production, not just a sandbox. Um, and like a concrete example is like if a RAG system is returning bad answers, most people assume the model is the problem. But I'm realizing like retrieval failure and generation failure have different fixes. So now I'm able to diagnose which one I'm looking at, and that's a conversation I'm realizing that specificity can really differentiate you now with folks who are, yeah, with the way things are changing and when you're speaking from an AI PM lens.
Yeah. Now you're getting me very curious to get into the agents that you have built. Maybe do you
Mhm.
want to like pick up one agent that's your favorite that you have built, agent or agent application or a process, agentic workflow, anyone that you have built, and dive in more for our audience to learn from as well.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk about the one I recently built. So, well, I'm really excited about this client because, I come from a policy background and I used to work in the not-for-profit space, and this is a not-for-profit social impact organization working with um working with their demographic is Black and racialized youth in low-income neighborhoods and exposing them to technology and courses that help them upskill within technology. But this client has an enormous document library, and we're helping to, myself and the person who contracted me is helping them reframe, productize their offerings, and really solidify their value so that they can um, what's the word I'm looking for here? So that they can continue to like build and provide this sustainable and really important programming. So this, they have an enormous document library, everything from grant reports, curriculum, program evaluations. And the problem was that the team and myself, we couldn't sometimes surface the right information fast enough to actually use it. The documents existed, but the intelligence didn't. So what I suggested and what I built, I was just like, let me try to build this. Coming from the course was a RAG pipeline. So the architecture is documents are chunked and stored as vector embeddings. I was using Supabase. And then when someone asks a question, the system retrieves the most semantically relevant chunks and passes them to, I think I'm using GPT 4.1 with a tightly scoped prompt. The answer comes back grounded in their actual documents, not hallucinated from general knowledge. One of the decisions I made early on was around the chunking strategy. For a trust-sensitive client like this, I prioritize retrieval accuracy over latency. So that was a bit of a product trade-off, not just a technical default. Faster chunking can cut meaning mid-sentences, and I needed the system to retrieve the right context before I could focus more so on speed. And also, they've never had this before, so the speed was less of a concern. Um, the evaluation layer is also part of the architecture from the start. I run LLM as a judge scoring on answer faithfulness, so I know whether a response is actually grounded in the retrieved documents before it ever reaches a user. So we're at 634 chunks across 20 plus documents. All five test cases passed before the live URL even left my hands. And what I'd highlight architecturally is the scoping decision. So I deliberately constrain the model to only answer from retrieved context. No general knowledge fallback. And for a not-for-profit that needs to trust every answer, that glass box constraint was way more important than raw capability. It's a guardrail that's also a feature. So, when I think about, and I'm constantly thinking about as I'm building for SMB clients, what this means for larger enterprise clients. And at enterprise scale, this pattern becomes a knowledge management infrastructure problem. The architecture is the same, the governance layer gets more complex, the stakeholder map gets wider, but the core design decisions hold. Um, so yeah, so that's like a recent thing that I built is like top of mind, so it makes sense.
And how did your client react to that?
Shocked. I think, the person who contracted me, they were like, "Wait, you built this just, like." I was like, "Yeah, well, the pain point that I was hearing is we're building out these, documentation, but it seems like there's always one more document, always one more thing to reference, curriculum, et cetera, et cetera." And I was like, "Oh, we RAG is a perfect solution for something like this. We can always update the knowledge database." And how I design the actual agent is that I'm like, hey, like you're a research agent, you have to cite everything. You need to be really clear when something is not coming from the document knowledge database. And um, it's sped up work like 3, 4 times. So it's been really great.
Curious, what was your eval loop like for that agent?
Um, this is the area I would say that I'm most actively developing, and I want to be really straight about that. What I've built so far is a combination of LLM as judge evaluation and some stratified sampling, where I test against a range of edge cases before anything reaches a client. For this system, I defined 5 representative test cases mapped to the real questions the team actually asks. And all 5 had to pass before, the URL left my hands. The LLM as a judge work is more deliberate than it might sound. I'm not running a single generic quality check. I'm specifically evaluating answer faithfulness, which asks, whether the response is grounded in the retrieved documents or whether it's drifting into hallucination, which is key. Obviously, that's a different dimension than answer relevance, which checks the response against against what was actually sort of what was asked or context relevance. For them and for the client, faithfulness is the primary risk. The system cannot invent information for a not-for-profit making program decisions. So that's where I focus the eval layer first. What I don't have yet, which is important to also note, is automated regression testing, again, running on every deploy or real-time dashboard flagging model drift. The production monitoring architecture I'm building toward is layered. Data capture on every interaction, automated judges running on each response, metrics rolling up to pass rates over time, and some sort of a learning system when patterns spike. Those are on my build roadmap, and I'm actively sort of learning them. Uh, yeah, but right now I feel comfortable. Like what I have is like a pre-production checklist. There's like a very clear definition of what doesn't move regardless of deadline pressure. A 14-day shot and a 14-day shadow mode, which I always implement for any client. So yeah.
Yeah, I think these are all steps towards that you have to take, right? Like the first step is building, having your own local evaluation suite. Then you add all of these other LLM as a judge. And even within a LLM as a judge, you can experiment with different LLMs or mixture
Yeah.
of experts, depending on the client's budget and the token costs and all of that. So there's always room to iterate, and I'm so glad to see you in that iteration loop there.
Yes, no, you have to. It's never done.
Um, on that note, so how do you package these projects that you are doing for these clients for your resumes?
How do I package it for? That's a good question. I think right now, I think about it as sort of like as like an R&D labs. Like it depends on the client because sometimes when I'm in interviews, it's interviews for products that are similar to something that I've built for a client. So in that regard, it's usually, hey, I've done this before. This is what I've learned from it. Um, this is what I've learned building it on my own. Does this align with what your team is seeing? Does this align with some of the concerns or um uh like not issues, but does this align with what your team is coming up against? Because I think if that's the case, then that's great. I think we're going to be aligned. I think that what I've been doing with interviews now is I package what I've learned from a framework perspective, not necessarily just a client perspective. Um, Again, what's the problem? How did I go about choosing the solution? How did I design the agent, like the mind framework and the other frameworks? How am I evaluating and what is the observability layer? Because that's something that I think everyone can understand, and it's kind of it's product agnostic or so industry agnostic. Um, and I think to be honest, like the thing that stands out to most folks is the evaluation or the robustness of my evaluation critique when I talk through how I would go about evaluating the product that I'm or the company I'm interviewing for, like the product that I would work with, and pointing out flaws in the existing evaluation criteria. So that's kind of how I'm positioning right now. It depends on the client. Some clients I'm seeing a lot more companies looking for a bit of a founder builder mindset. So that's also quite new for AI builder roles. Um, and then for a lot of the AI PM roles, I think I'm seeing a lot more focus on AI PMs, just focus on evaluation. It feels like a bit of a gap in the industry from what I've seen.
Yeah. And many of them actually ask me, hey, I would love to talk about all of these things, but how do I even get past my my resume being picked up by the hiring manager? So curious, how are your calls coming through? Are they outbound, inbound? What's working for you?
A lot of them are inbound at the moment. Yeah, as I mentioned before, like the three things that are standing out are describing what I'm shipping, um, what are the problems I'm solving for, and then also just talking about failure, which it sounds funny, but it's talking about failure. I think a lot of people how many, I mean, I get overwhelmed with the amount of posts I see daily about this new tool, this new model. And I think it's good. You need to stay current and relevant, but I think people are looking for, hey, like, what have you built? What did you learn? How does this actually translate to the problem my team is solving? How are you going to integrate with legacy systems? What does this mean for my clients who have maybe they're not moving at the same speed as other clients in terms of like their comfortability with AI and agentic AI. And I think that's where a lot of the inbound calls are coming from. I'm seeing people come onto my recruiters come onto my webs on my LinkedIn. They engage with some of my posts. And then maybe in like 2 or 3 days, they'll reach out and say, hey, like, we saw this. I'm curious if you're looking for work. I have this opportunity. That's on my list. And also what's new is I'm maybe this is just me, but I think I've been applying for roles that I find interesting now, and I'm getting callbacks, and I think that's new. Like it's usually you need a reference, you need a referral, you need a recruiter, and um a lot of the what's different is how I present myself a lot of the times is, hey, like I've built something similar to this. This is what I've learned. I'm seeing that this could potentially be something that you might be dealing with. I'm curious to hear what you're doing. So it's still an application, but it reads a little differently, I'm sure, both for the hiring managers and for anybody looking at the application.
Yeah, because you're not saying, give me a job, or is this I'm interested in this opportunity, but instead you're saying, I have something that you might be interested in from a technology perspective. And if that's of interest, let's chat.
Exactly. Yeah. Game
That's
changer.
a great framing. Um, Maybe something for future students who are looking to sign up for
Mhm.
this program. If you were advising someone who is deciding whether to take this AI agentic course or the AI PM course or one of the courses,
Mhm.
I know you took the agentic AI course. Um, what kind of people should take this agentic AI course and what kind of people shouldn't, according to you, based on what you have learned through in the
Yeah.
course?
Based on my experience, I would say I'd start with should. I think you should take it if you're a PM, and I'll speak from the agentic AI.
Yes, agentic AI. Yeah.
Yeah. Should, if you're a PM with some sort of ex real experience or who is genuinely curious about why AI systems fail, not just excited about what they can do, if you're somebody who asks, but what happens in this edge case? I think this program can help you get the frameworks or teach you the frameworks to answer that question with engineering rigor that is not just instinct and is grounded in product principles and product thinking. Um, you should take it if you're someone who is willing to build during the program, not after. I was working with real clients while I was in the course. That's not very comfortable. The gaps surface faster and more publicly than you would like. But that's exactly why the learning compounds. I think if you wait until the course ends to apply it, sometimes you lose the most valuable feedback loop. Shouldn't. Um, I think someone who just wants a credential to put on a resume without doing any of the uncomfortable work. Um, I wouldn't describe this as just another certification course. It's like a thinking upgrade. And I mean that specifically, the program really forces you to rethink decisions you thought were purely technical, whether to use a single agent or multi-agent architecture, whether to build stateless or persistent memory, whether to deploy on cloud or client-owned infrastructure. Sorry. Those aren't engineering calls, they're product calls, and that's something you learn in the course. So if you're not really willing to rethink how you scope a product requirement when an LLM is in the stack, I think the credential won't move the needle for you. And then honestly, I think someone who thinks strong PM experience alone is enough to coast. Um, the technical humility has to be real. Some of the classes I was like, whoa, am I gonna get this? But I did have a solid foundation coming in, and the gap still surprised me. But I think the PMs who get the most out of it are the ones who are willing to sit in that discomfort rather than explain it away. And every time I left a class feeling overwhelmed by maybe what we had learned, once I started building that agent or doing the exercise for that week, it just landed into place. You're like, oh, that's how mind works. Oh, that's why I need to think about memory. Oh, that's how the data contract works. Okay, because you're applying it to something that you're interested in. So it just cha you can relate to the information a little bit differently. So that's really helpful.
Great to hear that. Thank you. Um, any advice for those out there building agents? Um, what should they be doing?
Hmm. Okay. Start. I feel like that's the first thing. Start on whatever platform makes sense for you. Um, the biggest mistake I see, and I also made this mistake myself early on, is treating an agent like a smarter script. I think some people think maybe if I just write a better prompt, it'll work. But there's a fundamental distinction that matters here. Automation follows a script, agents follow a goal. And that difference sounds really simple, but it's a reason a prompt doesn't handle the moment. Let's say one of like my clients' carriers changes their website layout, and then your data pipeline silently breaks. Reliability is an engineering problem, not a prompting problem. Um, Something I see people sort of getting wrong right now also, or something that I think a lot of people are not thinking about is skipping the human in the loop design entirely or treating it as an afterthought. I learned to define some of these verification checkpoints before a line of code is written, where the moments where the agent pauses and a human approves anything, consequential. And what I design to by default is what I'd call the supervised autonomy. Um, the agent will act after that, but every high stakes decision requires some sort of human approval before it executes. And I mean, what I'm seeing is for an SMB founder who has a team of like 6 to 8 people, that's not a limitation. That's the feature that lets them trust the system enough to actually use it and use it incrementally. Um, what else would I say? Mm, I mean, the third one is, I mean, this one is the hardest one to necessarily like learn in a classroom, but is that the eval question or evaluation question never gets asked early enough. I think people ship a lot of agents without defining what working actually looks like. So then they discover the failure mode from a client and not from a test suite. I think that's where a lot of production failures come from, and it's also where I see a clear gap between demo culture and production culture.
What you just said about the eval gap not being tested early, lot of companies, even today in production, have no eval suite. So what you're doing is actually something more hardened agents than many of these companies are putting out there.
Okay. You don't think that. You're like, okay, this is a massive company. Of course they have an eval suite, but you never know. And we're all learning. We're all learning. Everyone's learning.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark, for coming on and sharing your thoughts, your perspective, and being honest and vulnerable here with us on what you know, what you don't know, and what's right, what's wrong. So, thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been such a, I think I told you this like 6 months ago. Post layoff, I was just like, wow, like where I could not even imagine that I would be in a place I am now with these skills and tools, and it feels so what's the word I'm looking for? It feels really wow, my words are not coming to me today. Not just enabling, but it feels empowering. That's the word. It feels really empowering to say like, wow, I can get creative when a problem comes up. I can just use these new tools to solve it and explore. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you. I'm so glad to see that being applied in practice. Not many students do that. So I'm really um, excited to see your success and to see the success of the products that you build.
Thank you so much.